Hello, and welcome to Rethinking Our History, where we seek to shed a light on events that have been forgotten and covered up, and to make us all question how much do we really know about our history? I'm Felicia.
And I'm Ian, and we are here to reveal all the sordid details of history that have been swept under the rug. Get ready to get angry, be curious, and maybe have a laugh or two as we rethink our history.
Hello, friends.
Hey guys.
Thanks for joining us for another lesson. If you found us here first and are a fan of the paranormal, give our flagship show, The Paranormal Lovers, a listen. 100 episodes about everything from North Carolina mermaids to Mare Louise. We will be going to a convention on Lake Lanier March 14th through the 16th. The link for Hotlanta will be in the show notes, and we hope to see some of you there. We will have handmade tie-dye t-shirts. Ooh. So get one while they last, and we will have a couple set back for Patreon members as well. So, do that thing. If you'd be so kind, please give us a follow and share on social media, Facebook, Instagram, and would you believe it, TikTok. Still there. So glad our wonderful president was able to save our platform for us.
Yeah.
Yay, America.
Yeah.
If you would like to support the shows, we have a couple of ways to do so. We have a Patreon at patreon.com/paranormal lovers, where you get early access to unedited videos of both shows, as well as stickers and maybe a shirt every once in a while, too. We also have a merch store over at theparanormallovers.threadless.com. And finally, if you have a personal story or a topic request, email us at theparanormallovers@yahoo.com. So, this week we're going to take a look at a couple of acts of rebellion that helped end chattel slavery in the U.S. Often overlooked in the annals of history, the Gullah Wars took place during the time the Seminole Wars were also taking place. There was a quite unique relationship between the indigenous people and the enslaved people, especially in the Low Country. We talked a bit about it in previous episodes. The Seminoles are really a conglomerate of nations who fled from the colonizers. This includes enslaved people who made their way down to the Everglades. The glades of forever. I want to go there, but I don't want to go back to Florida.
I was gonna say bring some mosquito repellent.
Yeah, we'll talk about it. Many of whom escaped from the Sea Islands, where the Gullah Geechee were forming their culture in relative isolation. With their knowledge of tropical living and the indigenous knowledge of resources, they banded together to fight back against the colonizers and to survive. Descendants of those who melded their cultures are widely known as Black Seminoles or Black Indians. Even today, they have a rich culture that still thrives, no matter how much they tried to destroy it, as do the Gullah Geechee people. They had a much more unique experience due to their location and the weather patterns of the region. The Sea Islands are a small chain of islands that run the coast of Georgia and South Carolina. The area, while remote, was ideal for the cultivation of rice. Y'all, there are two different kinds of rice. Most of us eat Asian rice.
Right.
There's also African rice. Who knew?
Right.
Which is when plantation owners set out seeking to enslave rice farmers from the west coast countries of Africa, where the farming of African rice was major agriculture. The main point where people were loaded onto ships to make the long journey across the sea was Bunce Island in Sierra Leone. Now, I want to be very clear, this was the main port for the enslaved people who would come to the Low Country and the basis for today's Gullah culture. Obviously, there were other ports throughout Western Africa, but this is one that specifically records have shown that people were brought to the Low Country specifically from this one.
Yeah.
And I looked at pictures of it. It's actually kind of beautiful because the island's starting to take back over the everything. It's just like ruins now, but you can take a tour there, and I'm like, we're gonna have to go there, and I'm probably gonna cry.
Probably.
And those people from West Africa, and with those people from West Africa came new diseases, primarily malaria and yellow fever. Due to living on the African continent, the enslaved people had a resistance to these diseases, but their white captors did not. Due to the fear of infection, when the rainy spring and summer seasons would come to the island, the white people would flee inland to get away from the mosquito ridden fields.
Mm.
Some of them actually lived in the city full time and didn't even live at their plantations.
Yeah.
They were like, we'll leave the monkeys out in the field and I'm going to go live in civilization.
Right.
And I say that y'all can't see my face if you're listening to audio. We were talking about human zoos this morning, so
Yeah, sure were.
I will cover it at some point. But I got to tell y'all, this shit is heavy. This stuff is really heavy for me. And that's why it's been like a week since y'all got an episode, because
Yeah.
I had a panic attack last weekend. Sometimes my brain just says, stop it. While they left, quote unquote, overseers on the plantations, the isolation of being on the islands helped keep much of their cultures alive. But these people, while all having stepped through the same door of no return, did come from different countries with their own unique cultures. And there were white people that were left to watch over them, so their cultures blended but were not destroyed. Instead, the Gullah culture and language were born, and even after the war ended, they were left in relative isolation so that their culture could still flourish. Back in the war, once the Civil War started, the plantation owners were fearful of an invasion from Union troops, so they fled inland to the city. When Union soldiers landed on the islands, they found a people ready to fight for their freedom. This would be the first area where enslaved people were freed, and many of them went on to fight for the Union in the first South Carolina Volunteers. Unitarian missionaries came down to the islands to set up schools. The first school for freed people is the Penn Center on St. Helena Island, which you can go to. It now stands as a community center, and it is believed to be where Martin Luther King Jr. wrote part of his I Have a Dream speech. I also looked it up today. It's real expensive, but you get it for like the whole day. I might have my 40th birthday party there.
That'd be kind of cool.
It would be beautiful. But even before that, the West African captives of the Low Country were giving them hell. Take the Stono Rebellion of 1739. Just south of Charleston, a large group of captives, starting with about 20 people and growing to over 60, led by a captive named Jimmy, which is Jemme.
Jimmy.
Jamie? Jimmy? No, it's Jim, like a Jim.
Jimmy.
You know, like Jim's alter ego Jim.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Marched their way south. It is believed that they were attempting to get to Spanish Florida, where Spain had told them that they would grant them freedom. On their march, they killed around 20 white people. And it didn't take long for a white mob to form, and by the time night fell, half of the escaped captives were dead, and the rest had fled into the wilderness.
Mm.
But these white people were pissed, and they hunted down and murdered every single one of them. It was
Jeez.
after this rebellious act that lawmakers passed laws restricting the rights of enslaved people even more. What little rights we had.
Right.
Now, this next act of rebellion we recently learned about on the show. You guess which show?
Gullah Island.
No.
Is it? What's it called again?
United Shades of America
Oh, yeah.
with W. Kamau Bell.
What's up? Come on.
When he visited the South Carolina Gullah and met a descendant of this here man we're going to talk about. In April of 1861, the Civil War began at Fort Sumter in the Charleston Harbor. I don't know why I said it like that. That's a Boston accent. But Robert Smalls was put as a steerer on the CSS Planter. He laid low for a while, steering the ship as far south as Florida. But in April of 1862, Robert and 7 out of 8 other captives began planning their big escape. 7 out of 8 because there was one of the men that Robert did not trust. As they say, All skin folk ain't kinfolk. After a day sailing up and down the coast, the three white officers of the ship decided to spend the night on dry land. Robert and his fellow captives were so trusted that the officers allowed their families to come aboard and visit, as long as they left before curfew. Because, we can't be trusted to be out too late at night. We might cause mayhem. The only one of the wives, hang on, the only one of the wives who had any idea was Robert's wife, but she didn't actually think he was serious. So it was a surprise to her when she came aboard and he told her the plan. Quote, this was the first the women and children had heard of it, although Smalls recently had told his wife Hannah. She had known that Smalls longed to escape, but hadn't realized he was formulating a plan and intended to execute it. She was taken aback, but quickly regained her composure and told him, it is a risk, dear, but you and I and our little ones must be free. The other women were less steadfast. They cried and screamed when they learned what they stumbled into, and the men struggled to quiet them. Later, once the shock had worn off, those women admitted that they were glad for a chance at freedom. End quote. Before curfew, a few of the men pretended to take the families back home, but in reality, they circled back around to the North Atlantic wharf and hid on another ship. Robert dressed himself in the captain's uniform and donned a straw hat similar to the one the captain wore. He had spent his time on the ship studying the captain's mannerisms and learning the whistle signals. With this knowledge, he was able to sail to the other wharf to get their families, then sail past the 5 Confederate harbor forts. Five. 5 fucking forts on that harbor.
Damn.
That's not a big harbor.
Mm-mm.
As the planter neared Fort Sumter around 4:30 a.m., the other captives began to get nervous. Quote, as the nearly free slaves approached Fort Sumter, their apprehension grew. It was the most heavily armed of the Confederate forts, intended to be manned by the most suspicious soldiers. One of the men aboard later said, when we drew near the fort, every man but Robert Smalls felt his knees giving way, and the women began to cry and praying again. As the planter approached the fort, several men urged Smalls to give it a wide berth. Smalls refused, saying that such behavior would almost certainly arouse suspicion. He steered the ship along its normal path, slowly, as though he were merely enjoying the early morning air and in no particular hurry. When Fort Sumter flashed the challenge signal, Smalls again gave the correct signs. There was a long pause. The fort did not immediately respond, and Smalls now expected cannon fire to shred the planter at any moment. Finally, the fort signaled that all was well, and Smalls sailed his ship out of the harbor. End quote.
That's awesome.
Whew, whew. I don't know if I would be crying and praying, but I know my knees would be like, we're gonna, like, the anxiety. That is anxiety inducing. Are you still orbiting?
Yeah.
Cute. Hubby likes to play Kerbal. If anybody out there knows what that is, he's got his little ship orbiting while we record.
Yeah.
So yeah, he was Robert was a very, very smart man.
I bet.
Very, very
I bet
smart man.
once he got past that harbor, I bet just like, yeah, the sigh of relief and like, I don't know, like confidence of, man, I really did this.
Well,
Like,
just wait. Robert had sailed well out of firing range by the time the alarm was raised. It wasn't until they noticed the ship had not turned, but it was instead headed for the Union blockade that they figured out something was wrong. As stated by a witness from the Union side, quote, just as number 3 port gun was being elevated, someone cried out, I see something that looks like a white flag. And true enough, there was something flying on the steamer that would have been white by application of soap and water. As she neared us, we looked in vain for the face of a white man. When they discovered that we would not fire on them, there was a rush of contrabands, which is what they called escaped captives. Out on her deck, some dancing, some singing, whistling, jumping, and others stood towards Fort Sumter and muttering all sorts of maledictions against it and the heart of Dessouff generally. And I have no idea what the heart of Dessouff means, but I'm sure it's not great. As the steamer came near and under the stern of the Onward, one of the colored men stepped forward, taking off his hat, shouted, "Good morning, sir. I brought you some of the old United States guns, sir." That man was Robert Smalls, end quote.
Nice.
Mm-hmm. I just looking there like, ain't a single white man on that boat. It's all colored people. Not only had Robert and his fellow captives gotten their freedom, they delivered the planter equipped with light artillery, 4 loose artillery pieces, and 200 pounds of ammo.
Nice.
Most valuable was the captain's book, which contained the Confederate signals and locations of mines and torpedoes that had been laid in the harbor. And now I'm like, are there still mines and torpedoes in the Charleston harbor?
Probably.
Y'all need to get that shit out of there. Robert's knowledge of the inner workings of the Confederate Army in the area also proved to be invaluable. He was able to give info on the number of troops in the area as well as which forts were unmanned. And Robert was just getting started. He would join the Union Navy as a pilot of a ship. He piloted the Huron and the Paul Jones, but it was the planter he became captain of, and when he joined the Freeman's Bureau, he brought the ship with him. In the late 1860s, Robert was riding on a streetcar in Philly when he was ordered to give a seat to a white customer. Robert chose to leave the car altogether, and people were outraged at this treatment of an American hero. This incident pushed the Philadelphia legislature to pass a bill integrating public transportation in 1867,
Nice.
2 years after slavery, quote unquote, ended.
Mm-hmm.
2 years. And they were like, no, 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 no. I saw this video yesterday and I shared it on the Instagram stories. But it was this lady was like, let me explain to you the difference between North racism and South racism. In the North, they're like, you can do as good as me, but do it over there. In the South, they're like, you can live beside me, but you can't be better than me. And I'm like,
That's interesting.
it makes sense too. I'm kind of like, can we move up north though? I'm fine if you want me to do as good as you. If you want me to, I'll live over there. I don't care. Let's see. Robert would go on to hold various political positions, including serving a term in the U.S. House of Representatives. Robert's tale is one small part of a larger fight for freedom and humanhood. The Gullah Wars lasted over 100 years, and no matter how they tried to break their spirit, that spirit always prevailed, as it does today. The Gullah are in a battle with gentrification. The island of St. Helena and other land throughout the Gullah Geechee National Heritage Corridor is being bought up by corporations for resorts and golf courses. Not only is this a problem as these corporations are not Gullah owned or even black owned, but these resorts are driving up property taxes, and families who have lived on their land since the end of the Civil War are losing their property to higher taxes that they can't afford. And that's just not fucking okay.
No.
If you are interested in learning more about the Gullah culture and their fight to keep their land, sorry, indigenous friends, y'all can have everything else. Just let us have these little islands, okay? The links are in the show notes. So, what do you think about that little look at the Gullah culture and the Robert Smalls?
I like his story.
He is
I
wild. And
think that's like amazing to do back then.
the ingenuity that black people had to get their freedom, like, oh, excuse me. There's him, and then there's also another guy that I will probably cover at some point. He shipped himself in a box.
Yeah.
Mailed himself in a box to Philadelphia. Something about Philadelphia. I wish I could move to Philadelphia. I don't know. And go run up the steps like Rocky.
Right.
I don't think you're actually allowed to do that anymore because humans are trash.
Yeah.
All right, folks. Well, I hope you enjoyed this episode. I know it's a bit of a shorter one.
I
Uh
liked it.
yeah.
Pretty cool.
Yeah. There were other uh smaller battles that I could have covered, but honestly, my brain just couldn't take it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so thanks for being here with us another week, and we will see you guys later.
See you guys.
Love you. Bye.
Bye.